The last thing I expected when I pulled up to my lake cabin was to find a stranger in my porch swing looking like he owned the place. Flip-flops, Bluetooth headset, iced tea like it was his morning ritual, and I can still hear my spine make that tiny surprise snap. I walked up slow, sun in my eyes, and said, "Can I help you?" He turned, smiled like a man who'd rehearsed this moment in a hotel lobby, and said, "You must be the neighbor. I'm Travis. This is my place now." 3 words and something in me aged 10 years in a single breath. "No, sir," I said. "This is my cabin. Been in my family since 1982. He laughed, the kind of chuckle that lands like a pebble in a pond, and told me the HOA president had reassigned it, said it was abandoned, signed it over to his mom, who'd signed it to him. My blood went cold because the swing he was on was the one my grandpa built, because those pines around the porch I planted when I was 12, because the tools in that shed had my dad's fingerprints on them. But I didn't get loud. I went to my truck, drove 2 blocks to the HOA office, and called for fencing supplies. 3 hours later, 3 hours of sweat rivets and a market of silent promises, I had a team, a delivery, and a black steel fence that started where my property started and kept going through the road and straight up against the HOA office, like a line drawn in molten iron. One of the posts even nicked Karen's tulip bed. She came out screaming about headquarters and law and community, and I peeled out the original blueprints, nodded, and said, "Actually, I can." Before she knew what hit her, a post driver hammered a spike, the earth shuddered, and she stormed off yelling, "You'll regret this, Mr. Palmer." I watched her go, and I whispered back, "No, Karen, you will." If you want to know why I went to that length, you should hear how it started. Hi, I'm Mark Palmer, 55, retired forester born and raised on this lake. My dad bought this cabin with sawmill savings. He taught me how to read timber rings and how to whittle patience into a fence post. When the HOA formed 2 years ago, I didn't think much of it. A little order didn't bother me. But power tastes different on some people. Karen Dwyer wore blazers like armor and smiled with her teeth, not her eyes. She built rules like a mason lays brick, and little by little she stacked them until they shaded every porch on the lake. I left for 6 months to help my sister after surgery, left everything locked and paid, asked old Joe to peek in now and then. When I came back, there was furniture stacked in my living room and a smug kid on my swing. But the papers were the real gut punch, a quitclaim deed, a forged signature, Karen's fingerprints all over the paperwork. I learned that day that kindness can be read as weakness and that quiet men take notes. So I did my homework. I quietly title filed a quiet title action and kept my head down until the day a man in tinted glasses walked up to my truck and handed me a cease and desist from the HOA, and Travis ran out of the cabin holding a hammer, shouting that his mom had promised him the place. He admitted loud enough for the whole street to hear that he knew it wasn't really his. That admission, little stupid honest, changed everything. That was the first twist. The kid on my porch swing turned out to be the key that unlocked the whole mess. The next morning, the HOA came at me with clipboards and legal jargon waving around redrawn lot lines. "This cabin is now 42A under Travis Dwyer," one of them sniffed. I handed over a stamped county-approved survey that said otherwise. They grunted about court. I had already been in court quietly, smartly, and I wasn't surprised when the suit stormed away muttering threats. But threats are only as dangerous as the people who make them, and I'd been collecting a ledger of Karen's favors for a while. I got Rick, an old friend and lawyer, to comb through papers. He found a forged quitclaim and a web of shell transactions. I started digging old receipts, photos of my dad's handwriting, every scrap of a ledger. I scanned everything, and one anonymous night started slipping copies into neighbors' mailboxes with a single question: what would you do if your home was stolen while you were helping family? That nudge planted curiosity, then outrage. On a Saturday potluck, I printed the files and handed them around. Karen tried to shout. Folks shushed her, handed back the papers, and one by one people stood. The dam broke. Jeremy the fisherman, the quietest man in the county, stood and said he'd voted for Karen 3 times, but this was theft. Voices rose not with pitch, but with the steady heat of something righteous. Karen fled into her office and slammed the door. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. That night, my boathouse burned down, flames licking the roof and swallowing a framed photo of my father until the lake smelled like smoke and memory. Somebody wanted me erased. When my pantry was later defaced with "get out or else" and my father's WW2 medals went missing, the line had been crossed. That's when Sheriff Donnelly and old friends stopped being neighbors and became allies. Sheriff Donnelly slid a flash drive across his desk like a secret. "Found in Travis's car," he said. "We couldn't plug it into a machine without a warrant, but later behind a locked door, I did." The drive was a treasure trove. PDFs, receipts, forged invoices, little invoices paid to tanning salons that were really HOA slush funds. Fraud, plain as a bone. I didn't run to the press first. I organized a potluck, I handed out the evidence, and I let the neighbors speak for themselves. Then I called Janet McBride, a state auditor and my late wife's friend, who didn't blink when I told her. "This isn't just HOA corruption," she said. "This ties to a property scheme." Her voice was low because she'd seen the machinery before. She promised to go live in 48 hours, and she did. Janet's piece pulled at a thread, and the whole sweater unraveled. Nationwide syndication shocked anchors a governor's office that sat up and took notice. Karen was arrested. Travis turned witness, and odd as it felt, showed up at the sheriff's station, ready to tell the truth. But I didn't get to sip victory tea for long. A black SUV rolled in carrying a state receiver, Mr. Holt, tall, sharp, neat as a scalpel. He pinned a notice on the HOA door and said he was here to restore order. Only he wasn't neutral. Digging through public records, I found he'd been on payroll for a developer with plans for luxury lakefront conversion. Suddenly, the corrupt HOA was replaced by a cleaner suit that masked an equally hungry machine. That's when the second twist landed. Exposing Karen opened a door, and someone else tried to walk through it with a briefcase. By then, I'd learned a thing or two about leverage. You can win a quiet title and still lose a town if you let outsiders redraw the map. So we did something loud. I built a fence, not a petty barricade, but a message around the HOA office enclosing Holt's shiny SUV and locking the gate. It was legal. The road and parcel lines supported it. The cameras rolled, the news vans came back, and Janet's national piece dropped the smoking memo, an email that tied Holt to Golden Pine Developments. Within hours, the state suspended him. The gate opened once, and for him, that was the last time. Weeks later, the HOA was dissolved. Karen's trial date was set, and a new Lake Community Council rose from the mess, a council built on service instead of petty fines. We rebuilt the boathouse, neighbors brought hammers, and Hope Miss Nancy handed me a restored photograph that made me cry in front of half the town. Travis left an envelope with a check taped inside. He'd been a pawn, and he wanted to start paying back what had been taken. I framed the check not for the money, but for the sight of a young man finally seeing the line between being used and being human. If there's a lesson, not a sermon, just a breath I learned to take, it's this: kindness doesn't mean you're weak, and silence doesn't mean you consent. Boundaries are both physical and moral. They're the fences you build to protect the people and the memories that made you. And when someone tries to erase your history, sometimes the only honest response is to make your roots visible to everyone, because thieves work best in the dark. We got our justice arrests, resignations, a state audit, a rebuilt community center where the old HOA office used to be. But justice was not the point. The point was the reclaiming. Watching neighbors hammer timber into a frame for the new boathouse was its own kind of verdict. We hung my dad's photo where it belonged and put up a small wooden sign that reads, "Respect is the strongest boundary." It felt like a line drawn in a different kind of iron. So I'll leave you with this, and I want to know what you think. When a system meant to protect community becomes a tool for theft, do you fight fire with law, with loudness, or with quiet, stubborn reclamation? Was I right to build that fence, to pin a state receiver in his place, to make enemies so that my neighbors had a chance at reclaiming their homes? Share your take, and if you've ever had to stand up to a petty tyrant in your neighborhood, tell me how you did it. Comments, stories, and lessons, drop them below. I want to hear if you'd build the fence.